The rain came down in sheets, a cold, relentless torrent that soaked through my coat, my shoes, my very soul. I stood there, shivering, outside the door of my eldest son's house, a man of 72 years, reduced to begging for shelter. All I wanted was a warm meal, a dry place to rest my weary bones, maybe a blanket to wrap around my trembling shoulders. I knocked, my knuckles raw against the wood, hoping for a flicker of kindness from the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd given everything for. The door creaked open, and there he is. David, my firstborn, 40 years old, with a face hardened by years of ambition and a heart I barely recognized. His eyes met mine, cold and unyielding, like a stranger's. "Father," he said, his voice flat, "I cannot take you in. You will have to manage on your own." Before I could speak, before I could plead, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed in my chest, louder than the storm around me. I stood there, drenched, the weight of rejection heavier than the rain. My own son, my flesh and blood, had turned me away as if I were nothing more than a beggar. But what David did not know, what he could not have imagined, was that years later, he would find himself standing in the rain, knocking on my door, begging for the same mercy he had denied me. My name is Thomas Miller, and this is my story. A tale of sacrifice, betrayal, and the kind of love that endures even when it is trampled underfoot. I was born in a small town, in a house my father built with his own hands. A carpenter like me, he taught me the craft before I could read. Wood was my language, the grain and knots telling stories of time and resilience. I married young, to a woman named Eleanor, whose laugh could light up the darkest days. Together, we built a life, simple but full. We had 2 boys, David the eldest and Michael the youngest. Every choice I made, every splinter in my hands, was for them. I worked long hours in my workshop, shaping tables and chairs, cabinets and cradles, pouring my heart into every piece. The money was never much, but it was enough to keep food on the table, clothes on their backs, and dreams in their heads. Eleanor and I, we did not ask for much, just that our boys would grow up strong, kind, and happy. When Eleanor got sick, when the cancer came and took her piece by piece, I held her hand and promised I would keep our family together. I was 55 then, and the boys were grown, but I thought we were still bound by love. I was wrong. After Eleanor passed, the house felt like a hollow shell. The silence was louder than any storm. David had moved to the city, chasing a life of wealth and status, married to Sarah, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes. Michael, my youngest, had gone further away, working as a teacher in a small coastal town. But he called often, his voice a lifeline in my loneliness. I tried to keep busy, carving wood, fixing neighbors' broken chairs, but the emptiness grew. I missed my wife. I missed my boys. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could find a home with David. He had a big house, a family of his own. Surely there was room for me. So I sold the old house, packed a single suitcase, and took a bus to the city. I did not tell David I was coming. I thought the surprise would warm his heart. I imagined him opening the door, his face lighting up, saying, "Father, why did you not tell me? Come in, stay as long as you like." Foolish dreams, I know now. When I arrived, it was late and the rain was already falling. I stood outside his house, a grand thing with tall windows and a manicured lawn, so different from the creaky home where I had raised him. I knocked, my heart pounding with hope. You know what happened next. That closed door, those cold words. They cut deeper than any saw I had ever wielded. I stood there under the awning, watching the warm glow of lights inside. I could hear laughter, the clink of dishes, the life I was no longer part of. My knees buckled, and I sank to the ground, the rain pooling around me. I thought of Eleanor, how she would have wept to see her son turn away his own father. I thought of Michael, wondering if he too would one day forget me. And I thought of myself, a man who had given everything, only to be left with nothing. But this is not just a story of loss. It is a story of what comes after, of the strength you find when the world turns its back on you, of the fire that burns even in an old man's heart. I did not know it then, as I sat shivering in the rain, but that moment was only the beginning. Years later, David would come to me, broken and desperate, and I would face a choice: to give him the same cruelty he had shown me, or to show him what it means to be a father. I hope this story is reaching you, wherever you are, stirring something in your heart. Are you listening from a quiet room, or maybe on a commute, lost in thought? Please take a moment to share where you are in the comments below. Your words mean more than you know. And if this tale of family and betrayal resonates with you, do not forget to press like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you will not miss the next chapter of my journey. A story of pain, resilience, and the ties that bind us, even when they fray. The rain that night felt like it would never stop. It poured down my face, mixing with tears I refused to acknowledge. I stood outside David's house, my clothes clinging to my skin, my suitcase a sodden weight in my hand. The door remained closed, its polished wood a silent barrier between me and the son I had raised. I could still hear his voice, flat, unyielding, final. "Father, I cannot take you in. You will have to manage on your own." Those words carved themselves into my heart, deeper than any chisel I had ever used in my workshop. I was 72 years old, alone, and cast out by my own blood. I turned away from the door, my shoes squelching in the mud. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to mock my solitude. I walked, not knowing where to go, just moving to keep the cold from settling too deep in my bones. My mind drifted back to the years when David was a boy, when he would run into my workshop, his small hands eager to hold a hammer, his eyes bright with questions. "Pa, how do you make the wood so smooth?" he would ask, and I would show him, guiding his hands, teaching him to feel the grain. Those days felt like a dream now, faded and unreachable. I had come to the city hoping to find a home with David, to ease the ache of Eleanor's absence. She had been gone 5 years, and the loneliness was a weight I could no longer bear alone. I had sold our old house, the one where we had raised our boys, where every scratch on the floor told a story. I thought David would understand. He had a big house, a wife, 2 children of his own. Surely there was a corner for me, a spare room where I could rest my head and be near family. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. David and Sarah had made their decision long before I knocked on their door. I learned later, from whispers that reached me through neighbors and old friends, that they had discussed it weeks before my arrival. Sarah, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, had been the first to object. "He will be a burden," she had said, her voice carrying through the thin walls of their home. "An old man, always underfoot, eating our food, taking up space. We have the children to think of, David. We cannot afford it." David, my own son, had nodded, agreeing without a fight. They decided I was not worth the trouble. Not worth a bed, a meal, a moment of their time. That night, as I wandered the streets, I found a bench under a bus stop shelter. It was no protection from the wind, but it kept the worst of the rain off my head. I sat there, my suitcase at my feet, and watched the world go by. Cars splashed through puddles, their headlights cutting through the dark. Somewhere, a dog barked. I thought of Eleanor, how she would have held me, how she would have fought for me. "Thomas," she would have said, "our boys are better than this. Give them time." But time was something I was running out of. The next morning, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the cold lingered in my joints. I walked to a nearby diner, one of those 24-hour places with chipped mugs and greasy tables. I ordered a coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu, and counted the coins in my pocket. I had enough for a few days, maybe a week if I was careful. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, refilled my cup without charging me. "Rough night, huh?" she said, glancing at my damp clothes. I nodded, too ashamed to tell her the truth, that my own son had turned me away. Days turned into weeks. I found a cheap motel on the edge of the city, a place where the walls were thin and the air smelled of stale smoke. I paid by the day, stretching my savings as far as they would go. I tried calling David, hoping he might have softened, but the phone rang unanswered. Once, Sarah picked up. "Thomas," she said, her voice clipped. "We told you. We cannot help. You need to figure this out on your own." She hung up before I could respond. I sat on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the phone, wondering how my family had become strangers. I thought of Michael, my youngest, living far away in that small coastal town. He called when he could, his voice warm but strained with worry. "Pa, why don't you come here?" he said once. "I don't have much, but we can make it work." I thanked him, but I could not bring myself to burden him. Michael was just starting his life, teaching kids who needed him. I could not take that from him. Instead, I told him I was fine, that I was staying with David for a while. A lie, but one I told to protect him from my shame. The city was unkind to an old man with no home. I walked its streets, looking for work. But who hires a 72-year-old carpenter with shaking hands and a heavy heart? I took odd jobs where I could, fixing a broken fence, sanding a table, sweeping a shop floor. The pay was small, but it kept me fed. Sometimes I passed by David's house, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or my grandchildren. Once, I saw Sarah in the front yard, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the street. She spotted me, and her lips curled into something like disgust. "Still hanging around?" she called out. "Go find somewhere else to be, Thomas." I turned away, my face burning, and kept walking. The neighbors began to talk. I heard their whispers when I passed by, their pitying looks. "Poor old Thomas," they said. "His own son won't take him in." One woman, Mrs. Carter, who had known Eleanor, stopped me one day. She pressed a loaf of bread into my hands, her eyes soft with sympathy. "This is not right, Thomas," she said. "You raised that boy better than this." I thanked her, but her kindness only deepened my shame. I was a father who had failed, a man whose sacrifices meant nothing. The worst came one evening when I saw David at a local market. I had gone to buy a cheap meal, a can of soup to heat up in the motel's microwave. He was there with his children, my grandchildren, picking out apples. I stood frozen, watching them. The boy, James, was 6 with Eleanor's eyes. The girl, Lily, was 4, her hair in pigtails. I wanted to call out, to hold them, to tell them I was their grandfather. But David saw me first. His face tightened, and he steered the children away, whispering something to them. James looked back at me, confused, but David's grip on his shoulder was firm. They left without a word, and I stood there, the soup can cold in my hand, feeling like I had lost them all over again. That night, I sat in my motel room, the walls closing in. I thought of the house I had built for my family, the one I had sold to come here. I thought of Eleanor's smile, of David's laughter when he was small, of Michael's letters from the coast. I thought of the rain, of that closed door, of the man I had become, a shadow, a ghost, unwanted and unseen. But somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered. I was not ready to give up. Not yet. I had built a life once before, with nothing but my hands and my heart. I could do it again. The motel room smelled of mildew and despair, but it was a roof over my head, and for that, I was grateful. Each morning, I woke to the ache in my bones and the heavier weight in my chest. David's rejection played over and over in my mind, like a song I could not silence. Father, I cannot take you in. Those words followed me as I walked the city streets, searching for work, for purpose, for a reason to keep going. I was 72, with hands that still knew wood, but a heart that felt splintered beyond repair. Yet I refused to let the world, or my son, break me completely. I took any job I could find, sweeping floors at a warehouse, hauling crates at a market, fixing a broken chair for a neighbor who took pity on me. The pay was barely enough to cover the motel and a meal a day, but it kept me alive. I learned to stretch every dollar, buying day-old bread and canned beans, eating slowly to make it last. The city was a hard place, its pulse fast and unforgiving, but I was no stranger to hard work. I had built a home once, raised 2 boys, buried a wife. I could survive this. Still, the scorn followed me like a shadow. Sarah's voice was the loudest, sharp and cutting, even when she was not there. I heard through Mrs. Carter, the kind neighbor who sometimes slipped me a plate of leftovers, that Sarah spoke of me with contempt. That old man, she had said at a neighborhood gathering, her voice loud enough to carry. He will probably die out there on the streets. He should have planned better. The words stung, not just for their cruelty, but because they came from the woman my son had chosen, the mother of my grandchildren. I wondered if David agreed with her, if he nodded along as she dismissed me, or if he felt even a flicker of guilt. The neighbor's pity was almost as hard to bear. Mrs. Carter tried to be kind, but others looked at me with a mix of sympathy and judgment. Poor Thomas, they would whisper, thinking I could not hear. His own son turned him out. What kind of family does that? I wanted to shout that I was not poor, not broken, not a man to be pitied. But I kept my head down, my hands busy and my heart guarded. I had learned long ago that pride could not fill an empty stomach. One day, I found a small carpentry job through a man named Henry, who ran a hardware store a few blocks from the motel. He needed shelves built for his shop. Nothing fancy, just sturdy wood to hold tools and paint cans. I spent a week on those shelves, measuring and cutting, sanding until the wood was smooth as glass. My hands, though slower than they used to be, still knew the work. When I finished, Henry clapped me on the shoulder. "Good work, Thomas," he said, pressing a few extra dollars into my hand. "You ever need more? You come back." It was the first time in months anyone had spoken to me like I was more than a burden. That job gave me an idea. I had my tools, packed in that old suitcase I carried from David's doorstep. They were worn but sharp, the handles molded to my grip from years of use. I started small, offering to fix broken furniture for people in the neighborhood. A wobbly table here, a cracked chair there. Word spread slowly, and soon I had a steady trickle of work. It was not much, but it was mine. I rented a corner of an old garage from a man who took pity on me. A space just big enough for a workbench and my tools. I swept the sawdust each night, the familiar smell grounding me, reminding me of who I was. Michael, my youngest, was my lifeline in those days. He could not send much. His teacher's salary was modest, but every few weeks, an envelope arrived with a few bills and a letter. "Pa, I wish you would come here," he wrote. "There is a room for you, always." His words warmed me, but I could not bring myself to lean on him. He was building his own life, teaching children, making a difference. I would not take that from him. Instead, I wrote back, telling him I was managing, that I had work, that I was fine. Another lie, but a necessary one. With the money from Michael and my odd jobs, I saved enough to leave the motel. I found a patch of land on the edge of the city, a forgotten corner where the grass grew wild and the air smelled of earth. It was cheap, barely more than a scrap, but it was enough. I built a shack there, nothing grand, just 4 walls, a roof, and a door that locked. I used every trick I knew, scavenging wood from old pallets, hammering nails straight with hands that trembled from age. At night, I slept on a cot, listening to the wind rattle the tin roof, and felt a quiet pride. I was no longer a guest in someone else's world. This was mine. The work grew, bit by bit. People started coming to me, not just for repairs, but for custom pieces, shelves, tables, even a cradle for a young couple expecting their first child. I poured myself into each piece, carving small details, sanding until the wood sang. They called me the old carpenter, and for the first time, the word old did not feel like an insult. I was Thomas Miller, the man who made things with his hands, who turned raw wood into something lasting. But the scorn never stopped. Sarah's voice reached me through the grapevine, her words sharper each time. "He is living in a shack now," she told someone at the market, loud enough for others to hear. "Can you believe it? David's father, like some kind of vagrant." I heard it from a woman who came to my shack for a chair repair, her eyes wide with gossip. I smiled, nodded, and kept working, but inside my heart twisted. David never spoke of me, at least not that I heard. His silence was worse than Sarah's venom. It told me he had erased me from his life, as if I had never existed. One evening, I saw my grandchildren again. I was delivering a table to a house near David's, and there they were playing in the front yard. James, now 7, kicked a ball, while Lily, 5, chased after it, her laughter like Eleanor's. I stood at the gate, my heart pounding, wanting to call out. But Sarah appeared, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" she snapped. "You are scaring the children." I looked at James and Lily, their faces curious but uncertain. I wanted to say, "I am your grandfather. I love you." Still, instead, I mumbled an apology and left. The table delivered, my heart heavier than ever. Each night in my shack, I kept a small notebook. I wrote down the jobs I did, the money I earned, the pieces I built. But I also wrote down the moments that hurt. The closed door, Sarah's words, David's silence. I wrote to keep myself sane, to remind myself that I was still here, still fighting. I wrote about the hope I held on to, fragile but stubborn, that one day my family might see me again, not as a burden, but as a father, a grandfather, a man. I did not know it then, but those small steps, each job, each board, each nail, were building more than a shack or a table. They were building me back up, piece by piece. And they were leading me toward a day when the rain would fall again, and the tables would turn in ways I could never have imagined. The shack I called home was humble, but it was mine. Each morning, I woke to the creak of its wooden walls and the faint smell of sawdust that clung to everything. My hands, though gnarled and slower than they once were, found purpose again. The work I did, carving tables, crafting chairs, building shelves, began to spread beyond the neighborhood. People came from across the city, drawn by word of mouth about the old carpenter who made wood come alive. They did not see a man cast out by his son. They saw an artist, a craftsman, someone who poured his soul into every piece. And slowly, that work changed everything. It started small. A local cafe owner, a wiry man named Paul, asked me to build a set of tables for his shop. He had heard about me from Henry at the hardware store. "I want something unique, Thomas," Paul said, his eyes bright with ideas. "Something that makes people feel at home." I spent weeks on those tables, carving gentle curves into the edges, staining the wood a warm chestnut. When they were unveiled, the cafe filled with customers who ran their hands over the smooth surfaces, marveling at the craftsmanship. Paul paid me generously, but more than that, he told everyone who asked, "Thomas Miller made these. Find him if you want something real." Word spread like wildfire. Soon, I was getting orders from restaurants, offices, even a small gallery downtown. I could not keep up with the demand in my tiny shack, so I rented a proper workshop, a drafty old barn on the edge of town, big enough for a workbench, a lathe, and stacks of lumber. I hired a young man named Eli, a quiet boy with quick hands and a good heart, to help with the heavy lifting. He called me Mr. Miller and listened when I taught him how to read the grain of wood, just as I had once taught David. The work was hard, but it was good. Each piece I built felt like a small victory, a way of saying to the world and to myself that I was not broken. The money came too, more than I had ever seen in my years as a small-town carpenter. I saved carefully, still living simply, but I used it to make my shack into something more. I added a proper roof, insulated walls, a small stove for heat. Over time, it became a house, not grand like David's, but solid, warm, mine. I planted a garden out front, rows of tomatoes and herbs, and built a bench where I could sit and watch the sunset. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a life again, not just surviving. But while I was rising, David was falling. I heard it first from Mrs. Carter, who still brought me bread now and then. "Your son's in trouble, Thomas," she said one evening, her voice low. "His business went under. Bad investments, they say. He's lost nearly everything." I nodded, my heart a tangle of pity and pain. David had always chased wealth, believing it would make him better than the simple life I had given him. Now it had crumbled, and I wondered if he thought of me at all, if he regretted that night in the rain. More whispers followed. Sarah had left him, taking half of what little they had left. She moved to another city, leaving David with James and Lily, my grandchildren, now 8 and 6. He was struggling to keep a roof over their heads, the grand house with its manicured lawn gone, replaced by a cramped apartment in a rough part of town. I wanted to reach out, to help, but the memory of that closed door stopped me. I had been a father once, and he had turned me away. Still, I could not help but watch from a distance, my heart aching for those children, for the son I still loved despite everything. Then came the day that changed it all. I was in my workshop, sanding a cedar chest, when a woman walked in. She was older, with sharp eyes and a quiet strength, and introduced herself as Clara, a gallery owner from the city. "I've seen your work, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice steady. "The tables at Paul's Cafe, the benches at the community center, You have a gift? I want to feature your pieces in my gallery. A solo exhibition. People need to know your name." I stared at her, my hands still on the wood, unable to believe it. Me, an old man from nowhere, in a gallery? But Clara was serious, and her belief in me was like a spark to dry tinder. The exhibition took months to prepare. I worked late into the night, crafting pieces that told my story. Tables etched with patterns that echoed Eleanor's smile. Chairs sturdy enough to hold a lifetime of memories. Eli helped, learning as we went, and Clara guided me, teaching me how to present my work to a world I had never known. When the day came, the gallery was packed with people. Strangers, neighbors, even Henry from the hardware store. They walked among my pieces, touching the wood, whispering words like beautiful and timeless. By the end of the night, every piece had sold, and Clara handed me a check that made my hands shake. "You are an artist, Thomas," she said. "This is just the beginning." That night, I sat in my small house, the check on the table, and thought of David. I had built something from nothing, not for revenge, but for myself. Yet I could not shake the image of him struggling, of my grandchildren hungry or cold. I wondered if he knew about my success, if he cared. I wrote to Michael, telling him about the exhibition, and he called me, his voice thick with pride. "Pa, you did it," he said. "I knew you could." He promised to visit soon, and I held on to that promise like a lifeline. Then, one evening, as the rain began to fall again, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it, and there was David, drenched, shivering, his face gaunt with desperation. Behind him stood James and Lily, their small faces pale, their clothes too thin for the cold. "Father," David said, his voice breaking, "I have nowhere else to go. Please let us in." The rain poured down, just as it had that night years ago when I stood outside his door. I looked at him, at the children, and felt the weight of that moment, the choice between bitterness and grace. I stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in," I said, my voice steady. "Get out of the rain." As they stepped inside, I saw the surprise in David's eyes, the way he looked at my home, at the life I had built without him. I did not know what would come next, but in that moment, I knew I had found something stronger than betrayal. My own resilience, my own heart, still beating, still open, despite it all. The rain battered the roof of my small house, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the night I had stood outside David's door, forsaken. Now here he was, my eldest son, standing in my doorway, soaked to the bone, his eyes hollow with defeat. Behind him, James and Lily huddled close, their thin jackets no match for the storm. David's voice trembled as he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Father, I have nowhere else to go. Please let us in." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years, of choices made and bridges burned. I looked at him, at the man who had turned me away, and felt the past rise up like a tide. I remembered that night, the cold seeping into my joints, the sound of his door slamming shut. I remembered the months that followed, the hunger, the shame, the slow rebuilding of a life from scraps. My hands tightened on the doorframe, the wood smooth under my fingers, a reminder of all I had created since then. Part of me wanted to close the door, to let him feel the sting of rejection as I had. But then I looked at James and Lily, their small faces pinched with cold, and I knew I could not. They were my grandchildren, Eleanor's grandchildren, and no matter what David had done, they were innocent. "Hi, come in," I said, stepping back. "Get out of the rain." David's shoulders sagged with relief, and he ushered the children inside. They stood dripping on my floor, their eyes wide as they took in the small but sturdy house I had built. The warmth from the stove filled the room, and the smell of cedar lingered from a half-finished chair in the corner. David looked around, his gaze lingering on the polished table, the shelves I had carved, the life I had made without him. I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes, maybe even shame, but he said nothing. I handed them towels, dry clothes from a box of old things I kept for emergencies. Lily clung to her father's leg, her pigtails damp and drooping, while James stared at me, curious but wary. "Are you our grandpa?" he asked, his voice small but clear. My heart caught in my throat. I nodded, kneeling to his level. "Yes, James, I am." He studied me, his eyes so like Eleanor's, and I wondered what stories David had told him about me, if any at all. I made them tea, heating water on the stove, and set out bread and cheese from my small pantry. David ate slowly, his hands shaking, while the children devoured their food like they had not eaten in days. I watched them, my heart torn between anger and pity. "What happened, David?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. He looked down, his fingers twisting the edge of the towel. "Everything fell apart," he said. "The business failed, bad deals, bad partners. We lost the house. Sarah, she left, took what was left and went to live with her sister. I could not keep up, not with the kids, not with the bills. I had nowhere else to turn." His words were a confession, but they carried no apology. I waited, hoping for something more, a recognition of that night, of the pain he had caused. But he kept his eyes on the table, avoiding mine. I stood, moving to the window, watching the rain streak the glass. "Do you remember?" I said, my voice low. "The night I came to you? The night I stood in the rain, asking for a place to stay?" David's head snapped up, his face paling. He opened his mouth, then closed it, like a man caught in a lie. "I stood outside your door," I continued, turning to face him. "I was your father, and I begged for a corner of your home. You told me to manage on my own. You closed the door and left me in the cold." My voice did not waver, though my heart pounded. "Now here you are, standing in my home, asking for the same thing you denied me. The only difference, David, is this. I will not let my own flesh and blood freeze in the rain. Not you, not your children." David's face crumpled, his shoulders shaking. He covered his face with his hands, and for the first time, I saw tears. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was so wrong, Father. I thought I was better than you, better than the life you gave us. I thought money would fix everything. But I lost it all, and I lost you." His voice broke, and Lily climbed into his lap, her small hand patting his arm. James watched, silent, his eyes moving between us. I sat across from him, my hands folded, the weight of his words settling over me. I had dreamed of this moment, of hearing him admit his mistakes, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like a wound reopened, raw and aching. "I built this," I said, gesturing to the room around us. "Not to prove you wrong, but to prove to myself that I could. I was a carpenter before you were born, David, and I am a carpenter still. People know my name now, not because of wealth or status, but because of what I make with my hands. And I would have given it all to you, to James, to Lily, if you had only let me in." He looked up, his eyes red. "I did not know," he said. "I heard about your work, about the gallery, but I did not believe it. I thought you were gone, that you had given up." I shook my head. "I never gave up. Not on myself, and not on you, even when you gave up on me." The words were heavy, but they needed to be said. I stood, moving to the stove to pour more tea, giving him time to sit with the truth. That night, I gave them my bed, spreading blankets on the floor for myself. The children slept quickly, their breathing soft and even, but David lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I did not sleep either, my mind turning over the years, the pain, the love that still lingered despite it all. I thought of Eleanor, of how she would have welcomed him, no questions asked. I thought of Michael, who would be here soon, who had never stopped believing in me, and I thought of the man I had become, not broken, not beaten, but stronger than I ever knew. The next morning, as the rain slowed to a drizzle, I made a decision. I would not turn David away, but I would not let him forget. He would stay, he would work, he would learn what it meant to rebuild, and he would see, every day, the life I had created from the ashes of his betrayal. This was not revenge. It was truth, laid bare, in the warmth of a home I had built with my own hands. The morning after David and the children arrived, I woke to the soft patter of rain on the roof, a sound that no longer carried the sting of rejection. My small house was crowded now, with James and Lily's quiet whispers filling the air as they stirred on the bed. David sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, his eyes heavy with sleeplessness. I looked at him, my son, broken by his own choices, and felt a tangle of emotions. Love, anger, pity, and something new, something like resolve. This was not the end of our story, but a chance to rewrite it. Not with vengeance, but with something stronger. I made breakfast, simple oats with a drizzle of honey from my garden's beehive. The children ate eagerly, their faces brightening with each bite. James looked at me, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Grandpa, did you make this table?" he asked, running his small hand over the polished wood. I nodded, a warmth spreading in my chest. "I did, James. Every scratch and knot tells a story." He grinned, and for a moment I saw the boy David had been, before ambition hardened his heart. David was quiet, his gaze fixed on the table as if it held answers he could not find. I let him sit with his thoughts, knowing words alone could not mend what was broken. After breakfast, I took the children outside to the garden, showing them the tomato plants and the herbs I had tended through the seasons. Lily giggled as she picked a sprig of mint, sniffing it with delight. "It smells like candy," she said, and I laughed, the sound foreign but welcome. David watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. But I saw the way his shoulders softened, as if the sight of his children happy in my home eased some of his burden. That day, I made a choice. David and the children would stay, but this was not charity. It was a chance for redemption. "You will work," I told him that evening, after James and Lily were asleep. "Not for me, but with me. You will learn what it means to build something, to earn your place." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine for the first time without flinching. "I will, Father," he said, his voice low but steady. "I want to make this right." The days that followed were not easy. David was out of place in my workshop, his hands clumsy with tools he had not touched since he was a boy. But he tried, following my instructions, sanding boards and measuring cuts under my watchful eye. Eli, my young apprentice, was patient with him, showing him small tricks I had taught. David's pride, once a wall between us, began to crack. He asked questions, listened, and slowly the work became a bridge, fragile but real. The children thrived. James followed me everywhere, asking about every tool, every piece of wood. Lily drew pictures of the garden, taping them to the walls of my house, turning it into a home. I taught them to carve simple shapes, guiding their small hands as I had once guided their fathers. Each laugh, each question, was a stitch in the wound David had left, not healing it completely, but making it bearable. One evening, as we sat around the table, David spoke. "Father," he said, his voice thick, "I need to say this. I was wrong. Not just that night, but for years. I thought I could be more than you, better than the life you gave us. I thought money and status were everything. But I lost it all. And I lost you. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I am sorry." His eyes were wet, and he looked at me, not as the man who had turned me away, but as the boy I had raised, lost and found again. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of his words settling over me. "David," I said, "forgiveness is not a gift I give lightly. You hurt me more than you know. But you are my son, and these children are my blood. I will not turn you away, not because you deserve it, but because I know what it is to stand in the rain and have nowhere to go. I will not do that to you." He nodded, tears falling freely now, and Lily climbed into his lap, hugging him tightly. A week later, Michael arrived. He stepped through the door, his teacher's satchel slung over his shoulder, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Pa," he said, pulling me into a hug. "You did it. You built all this." He looked around, at the house, the garden, the life I had made, and I saw pride in his eyes, the kind that fills a father's heart. When he saw David, his smile faded, but he embraced his brother, a gesture of peace, if not full reconciliation. The children ran to him, calling Uncle Michael, and the room filled with their laughter. We sat together that night, a family fractured but mending. The wounds were still there, raw and deep, but they were no longer bleeding. David worked beside me in the days that followed, learning, rebuilding, not just wood, but himself. The children grew stronger, their laughter a constant in my home. And I, Thomas Miller, found peace. Not in retribution, but in the quiet strength of a father's love, unbroken by betrayal. The rain still fell sometimes, but it no longer felt like a curse. It was just water, washing away the past, leaving room for something new. I looked at my sons, my grandchildren, and knew that this was the lesson. Wealth can vanish, pride can crumble, but the bond of family, if tended with care, can endure. And if you ever lose it, if you ever stand in the rain and turn away those who love you, you will carry that regret for a lifetime. This story of mine, of rain, rejection, and redemption, has been a long one, but I hope it has stayed with you. Imagine for a moment, what would you do if your own children left you standing in the cold, with nowhere to turn? Would you close your heart, or would you open your door, as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear them. And if this tale of family broken and rebuilt has moved you, please press like, subscribe, and ring that bell. There are more stories like this, full of heartbreak and humanity waiting for you. Do not miss them.